Hey folks, I'm back with another quick video before the end of the year, giving you my top 10 reads of 2024. My 10th favorite book of the year, that was Rover Powered by Drew Hayes, a short little novella about a wizard, Wanda, and her loyal hound, Wumble, on their quest to become alchemists. The gist of the story is that while playing together, the dog Wumble kind of stumbles upon this orb of great power that gets absorbed into him. And so Wumble then becomes like this extremely powerful magical entity. But nobody knows it, and he doesn't even know it. He just knows that he loves Wanda and he loves being with her while they go on adventures. And as Wanda gets herself into extremely dangerous situations, there's this wholesome connection and vibe throughout the entire story. And it was just a heartwarming and fun read. I have a full review on my channel if you want to check it out, but it's a very short book, just a couple hours on Audible, which is where I listened to it. And yeah, it was good enough to be my 10th favorite book of the year. So moving on, we have number 9, Listen for the Lie by Amy Tintera. I've said before, I don't often venture out of fantasy and sci-fi, although I definitely want to do more of it. And this was one of those steps beyond my comfort zone. Listen for the Lie is like a Hallmark movie, a murder mystery, and a crime junkie podcast all jammed into one book. So the story goes, Lucy, blamed for her best friend Savvy's death in this small town in Texas, she leaves to go live in Los Angeles because everybody thinks she did it. Even though she swears she didn't do it, she actually has no memory of what happened. And then when this surprisingly handsome crime podcaster starts looking into the mystery, and she is coincidentally pulled back, the whole mystery comes roiling back up, and we get this little, whodunit murder mystery. Listen for the Lie is a hilariously cheesy book, and I really loved the slow burn release of information, ramping up more and more as we head towards the climax at the end of the story. It's a really fun book, but I do have to dock it for absurdly cheesy circumstances. I mean, in this story, literally every single person in the small town is sleeping with somebody else. Like, everybody's having sex with everybody. It's just insane. And it was almost to the point where I was suspending my disbelief about all the other craziness that happens in the story, because it was just so bonkers. Listen for the Lie has stuck in my head long after finishing the book, and partially for the great mystery, but however, I can't think about how great this book was without thinking about the ridiculous amounts of cheesiness that were also in it. So, for that reason, it gets my number 9 spot. At number 8, we have To Flail Against Infinity by J.P. Valentine. To Flail Against Infinity is the first book in the Stargazer's War, a sci-fi progression fantasy about a galaxy of cultivators that harvest the burning, violent power of Ki. But when Cal taps into a vast, cold, tranquil source of power that's unlike anything any cultivator has ever sensed before, he accesses this untapped infinity that is beyond the limits of modern understanding. And what I love about this book is that I'm pretty sure the author and I had a very similar inspiration for the source of Cal's magic and of my main character's magic in our 2 different series. And when I heard about that premise, I was very excited to read it, and I was not disappointed. Though the prose can wax purple at times, in my opinion, it is very beautiful overall. I really enjoyed Cal's journey, him learning about his new powers, and considering the implications of his existence and what that means for the universe overall. So that's my 8th favorite book, and it's somewhat related to my 7th and 6th favorite books, which I am kind of lumping together because they are books 1 and 2 of the Stormweaver series. Book 1 is Iron Prince, and book 2 is Fire and Song, and these books are by Bryce O'Connor and Luke Chimilenko. Hope I said that right. They're great authors, and I'm super looking forward to book 3. It's probably my favorite interpretation of lit RPG that I've ever seen. The characters in this story are not in a game like in most lit RPGs. It's just that they're given these like semi-magical android super suits called CADs that grant the characters wild superpowers. The specifications of these CADs are monitored and tracked using a system just like you see in an RPG, which is why I would classify this book as a lit RPG. You know, they have base stats like strength, dexterity, speed, endurance, perception, and then there's this other stat called growth, which understandably controls how quickly a character's other stats will advance. The stats range from F0 to S, at least 9, possibly beyond, but from F0 to S. This gives the experience of a lit RPG novel without needing to explain why the reader should care about the events in the game, which is a problem that I have with some lit RPGs. The premise for this story is that Ray is like a super weakling. He's granted all F0 base stats except for his growth, which is S. And when I heard about that before reading this series, like I heard about these books way long ago, like years ago, at least, 3-4 years ago. And I always heard that they were great, but I heard about this premise of Ray, the main character, having F0s, but an S rank growth stat. And I was like, that's stupid. Like, who's going to believe that? I'm never going to take that seriously. But when I finally did get around to reading this, or listening to it on Audible, the authors really do come up with a, in my opinion, believable in-story reason for why Ray is like this. And that really makes me appreciate everything else about the story more. Unfortunately, I do have one big complaint about these books, which probably is why it's, at the back end of my top 10 rather than the front end, and that is every single character's life in this story seems to revolve around the main character. I feel like everybody's like hopes, desires, wishes, dreams, like all their thoughts constantly are just revolving around Ray. There's like very little care about other things. And while I know the story is about Ray, it's a little too much for me. Like there's got to be something else in their lives that's not related to Ray that they're worried about. And it's not like that's a minor thing. Like it's important, but it doesn't break the series for me. And once I'm able to get past that, these books are a rip-roaring journey from rags to riches to the end of the universe with loyal friends, dark family secrets, a galactic war that threatens the existence of humanity. I have thoroughly enjoyed the Stormweaver books, and I can't wait for book 3. Number 5, we get to the first book that I actually read paperback. That's The Eyes of the Void by Adrian Tchaikovsky. You can see I took some notes because this book was so good, and the Adrian Tchaikovsky's way of writing is one that I want to emulate myself. It's an awesome space opera series about humanity which has been forced away from Earth. Earth has been destroyed by these creatures called architects, which are like giant moons that roam around the galaxy, tearing up planets with gravity-based powers or weapons. We don't really know the mechanism behind how they do it, but they use gravity to tear planets apart and twist them into ribbons. It's such a good basic premise, but what really brings the story together is how deep the characters are and how deep the factions are. I mean, every single person you meet in every single faction has a very, at least appears to have a very believable history, a very intricate backstory, wants, dreams, wishes, hopes, baggages, fears, just so much grounded truth in every single thing that happens. And while book 2 was maybe a small step back for me from book 1, I will certainly say that it felt like a lot of setup for book 3, but we learned a lot about the mysteries, the I guess magic system, if that's what you want to call it, with the gravity devices and the warp speed engines, and then the history of all the different factions in the world and their clashes with each other. It's just such a fascinating like political landscape in a way, and I am stoked for The Lords of Uncreation, Book 3, which I expect to read in 2025. We'll see if I get to it. My fourth book is another space opera. It's The Misfits by P.E. Rowe. And I think, the reason it's only number 4 on my list and not higher is because I've actually heard the stories before. This is my first time reading them all together, like one after another, all the way to the end of volume 1. But if you don't know who P.E. Rowe is a science fiction short story writer who uploads a short story every week onto his YouTube channel that you can listen to for free. And he's on a little break from that right now because he's working on a bigger project. But The Misfits is kind of his main story that he's got among all of his short stories that he writes. The Misfits follows a band of, misfits. Broken, lost, outcast souls who travel across the galaxy on their ship, the Yankee Chaos. As I said, Volume 1 is a collection of 12 short stories that follows the crew as they stumble upon an unknown apocalypse, mysterious alien artifacts, a timeless wizard terrorist, and much, much more. The Misfits is one of my favorite ongoing series at the moment, and I eagerly await Rowe's return to the series. Book 3 is Pawn's Gambit by Rob J. Hayes. I love the Mortal Techniques books, and Pawn's Gambit was gripping from start to finish. The concept is the gods are holding a competition to determine the heaven's next ruler, and they're choosing their human champions to represent them. The god of lost and misplaced things chooses you, a disgraced strategist, and she is the perfect hero for this story. We see her intelligence, but she has so many shortcomings which almost do her in all throughout the story. She has heavy baggage that support her decisions and really craft her fears, and it really, really brought the story to life. That being said, my absolute favorite part of this book, which might have been my favorite part of anything in any book this entire year, was the personification of one of my absolute favorite tropes in stories, the ticking time bomb. Rob J. Hayes brought it to life in the story. It was perfect. As soon as I saw it, I knew I loved this book. I'll never forget it. Props to you, Rob J. Hayes. This was amazing. The runner-up, number 2 silver medalist, is Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. It took me a while to get to this book. It's the third of the secret projects that I read. I still haven't read the Wizard's Handbook to Medieval England. I've heard that's the weakest, so I'm kind of taking my time getting to it. But Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is certainly my favorite of the 3 I've read so far. Yumi is an honored priestess. Painter is a civil servant, treated like any civil servant in our world, an absolutely vital person who is not appreciated enough. The story is about the threads that bind their lives together and are tied deep beyond the void. It's a wonderful mystery, slice of life fantasy that digs into the themes of loneliness and responsibility and forces you to look at them and see how they tie together and see how they shape people's lives. The highlights for me in this book are of Yumi exploring Painter's world, getting to live a normal life for once, and of course, them solving the mystery of what happened to both of their worlds. I really enjoyed this change of pace from Sanderson. However, one thing that frustrated me about this book, and really what brings it down to number 2, is the amount of unnecessary Cosmere references and Hoyd being an absolute weirdo. If it was just a little bit toned down, I would feel so much more comfortable recommending this book to people who are not fantasy readers. Like, not just not Sanderson readers, but not fantasy readers. I feel like I can't share this book with my family and like friends who don't read fantasy because there's just like so many bizarre references. And while it's a beautiful book and it's wonderful, I can't justify putting it at number 1. Speaking of number one, we have Kingdom of Dragons by Jed Hearn, another Kickstarter book. It's funny that books 1 and 2 are both Kickstarter books. So technically I'm still reading it, as you can see. But I'm going to finish it before 2024 is over. And I do know what happens because I was a beta reader for this book. And the reason that I'm putting it at number one is because I know the end, and I'm seeing the changes that Jed made, and it makes a great book even better. I'm really, really impressed with the changes that he's made. Kingdom of Dragons is a story that follows two new dragon riders in the Kingdom of Alatia. Rovan, who is a spy for the rival nation of Dursine, and an agent sent to infiltrate the floating city of Elegium, which is home to the dragons, and Zora, a ranger and the daughter of a former Dursine Sun Warden. She hates Dursine, Rovan's home country, because of what they did to her father, and neither of them ever expected to become dragon riders. The story is about friendship and loyalty and the bonds between Rovan and Zora and their dragons and their comrades and their enemies, and how they meet everything on their journey. Jed Hearn plays on your heartstrings. He fiddles with your emotion as you watch the end come in slow motion. But then when it hits, it beats you like a drum, and it's so good. And I can't wait to see some of the changes he's made to the end, because every change he's made has enhanced the book so far. I'm really, really loving Kingdom of Dragons. I'm going to finish it easily within the next 5 days, and I'm planning on doing a larger review of it in the future when I am done. So Kingdom of Dragons by Jed Hearn, number one. Also, got to give a great shout out to the awesome art inside the book.
Just like that. You can see that, right?
Oh man, it's amazing. I love it. I'm digging the book. Yeah, there's my top 10 for 2024. Hope everybody had a great 2024 of reading, and I'm looking forward to 2025 being even better. I'm certainly going to be publishing my first book, so I'm super stoked for that. Have a good one, everybody.